The current lieutenant governor of the great state of North Carolina is a guy by the name of Mark Robinson, and he is probably the craziest Republican in national politics.
That we know of.
Crazier. True, because there's always another one right around the corner, right?
Got a caveat, yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%. So, I think he's crazier than Trump, Carrie Lake, Marjorie Taylor Greene. This guy is nuts. He's the current incumbent lieutenant governor. The Democratic governor of North Carolina is a guy by the name of Roy Cooper. He's term locked. He's done. Okay, so he's no longer able to seek re-election. So the gubernatorial race for North Carolina is between the current attorney general, Josh Stein, a Democrat who is currently winning, and the lieutenant governor, the Trump-endorsed MAGA Republican, Mark Robinson. Well, CNN broke a devastating story about Mark Robinson and his, shall we say, eclectic history, his internet history, his pornography history.
The Trump-backed candidate for governor in North Carolina, Mark Robinson, has made dozens of disturbing and damning comments on a porn website. Some of the comments are frankly so disturbing that we cannot air them. But they include Robinson writing, quote, "I am a black Nazi, and I wish they would bring slavery, back." Robinson also calling himself a, quote, perv while discussing his affinity for transgender pornography. Keep in mind that he has called transgender kids sick and demonic. These comments were made between 2008 and 2012. And at this hour, Robinson is defiant, refusing to step aside.
So he apparently was on a porn website, a porn message board, which I guess is the best purpose, the best services of a porn website. It's not for the images or the videos. You want to go for the rigorous debate.
Are you really engaging with porn if you're not hanging out in the comment section?
I mean, I imagine that's the most comprehensive way to view porn, right? It's not, again, really the plebs go there for the imagery, but a real scholar of pornography, they go into the message boards. And this guy,
and I think as a New Englander, I just don't think you'd understand. So.
Fair enough. Listen, I'm learning as I go along, and let me tell you, this story from Mark Robinson will teach you quite a bit. So he called himself on this message board prior to him entering politics, but he was still well into adulthood. This is a guy in his 50s or 60s, so he was definitely old enough to know better. Called himself a black Nazi, defended the merits of slavery, and even though he is an outspoken critic and bigot of trans people, says he enjoys trans pornography, and they've been able, CNN, to trace him definitively, his identity to this message board. And he has denied the accusations. He says, of course it's not me. I have nothing to do with it. You all know my character. But many people are speculating that this will not only cost him the race, which he was already losing, Stephen, but it may cost Donald Trump North Carolina, which Democrats haven't won since 2008, President Obama. And as a consequence of losing North Carolina, it may cost Trump the election. This has huge ripple effects.
Who could have known that the spiritual successor to Martin Luther King Jr., as Trump said, could have turned out so horribly? Oh, my gosh.
This is Martin Luther King on steroids. I think you're better than Martin Luther King. I think you are Martin Luther King times 2. One of the great stars of the party, one of the great stars in politics, Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. I'm a great supporter of his. You're incredible, Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. This is a hot politician. He's a hot politician. Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. A real star, great guy, friend of mine, Mark Robinson.
He said not only is he basically the new Martin Luther King Jr., at various points Trump said, I think you're twice as good as Martin Luther King Jr.
Martin Luther King times 2.
I mean, the shit that Trump would say about this guy is so detailed that the vice president, of course, her campaign is rightfully making all kinds of hay with this. They're spamming a multi-million-dollar ad in North Carolina as we speak, emphasizing the close association between Trump and Robinson.
You have to cherish Mark. He's a star. You have to cherish him. Amen. It's like a fine wine, because that's what you have. You have a fine wine. He's an outstanding person. I've gotten to know him so well and fairly quickly.
I should also say at the time of recording, Donald Trump will be in North Carolina for a rally, and he has reportedly reached out to Mark Robinson, Martin Luther King Jr. 2.0, twice Martin Luther King Jr., the future of the Republican Party, and said, do not show up to that rally. You will not be appearing at that rally. So This is huge, buddy. It's huge.
I want to give some props to CNN for their investigation. They had to do quite a lot of work, considering that I believe the guy used his full name and email address across every single website he was signed up to, which, hey, I give somebody mad props for that. Listen, own it.
No, yeah, 100%. Like, he wasn't trying to hide anything. I mean,
well,
that's so funny.
He is disavowing all of it, and he said that now it's all fake, but, prior to that.
Well, what's funny too, like the shamelessness of it. So reportedly, before CNN broke the story, they reached out to Robinson's campaign and they gave him 48 hours. Like, hey, you want to comment on this? You want to weigh in? They declined. Then right before, the CNN reporting went live, they reached out and said, okay, we'll do an interview. And so Mark Robinson sat down for an interview virtually with CNN. I say virtually because he probably had another laptop up. he was probably like surfing on that particular message board during the interview. And of course, he lied. He just straight up lied. He said, of course, this isn't me. This is ridiculous. And what was interesting to me was the ease of the lie. Like, I've not been in this situation, but I have to imagine that even though I consider myself a confident person, I would just be scared shitless the whole time. But Mark Robinson looked the camera dead ass in the eye and lied very casually. He's like, my character, I would have nothing to do with anything like this. This is tabloid trash. These are my enemies trying to take me down. And the real question is, I wonder how many MAGA Republicans in North Carolina and across the country will buy that.
Folks here also know my character. They know who I am. They know my voice, so to speak. This is not my voice. This is not things that we would ever say or even think.
How do you explain all of the matching details on this profile? The profile on Nude Africa lists your full name as Mark Robinson. The email listed on the account is an email that you have used elsewhere on the internet, including with your photo. You have used that name, Mini Soldier, on multiple social media accounts, including Twitter, Pinterest, Black Planet, and YouTube. How can you deny, with all of these matching details, that this is you?
Look, I'm not going to get into the minutia of how somebody manufactured these salacious tabloid lies, but I can tell you this. There's been over $1 million spent on me through AI by a billionaire son who's bound and determined to destroy me. The things that people can do with the internet now is incredible. But what I can tell you is this. Again, these are not my words.
You mentioned AI. Are you saying that somebody was somehow manufacturing biographical details to exactly match you using your username? Is that what you're telling me here when you say that?
Look, I have no idea how this was done. I have absolutely no idea how it was done. And I have 5 weeks left in this campaign to focus on the substantive issues that North Carolinians face. I do not have time for tabloid trash.
Okay. Well, how do you explain some of this being on the Internet Web Archive? Something that can't be.
I've made my position clear, and we are done with this.
I feel like the past 8 years for Republicans is the defining characteristic is shamelessness. So who knows? Again, I think that for a lot of these things, the core base doesn't care, but you are losing. I feel like you're shaving off these outside perimeters of your party, and you can only lose so much because despite as embarrassing as it is to say, the election is still very close. So, if you lose a few thousand voters, that could be enough for some of these states to flip you.
Well, and I'll just say, kind of to wrap it up, I mean, apparently Republicans were really pushing behind the scenes for Robinson to actually just withdraw from the race, even though they had like 12 hours to get his name off the ballot. So they were basically willing to sacrifice the governor's mansion in North Carolina, knowing that they probably wouldn't be able to replace him, and just give it to the Democrats in order to get him out of the race, so it would put enough distance between him and Trump. Now, that ship sailed because he refused to drop out. So he's on the ballot. He is running for governor still. He was losing the election by like 8 to 10 points prior to the scandal. He will almost certainly lose the election as a consequence. But the real implication is, again, it's really risky for Trump, because if Trump loses North Carolina, which he was favored to win, even though it's a purple state, his chances of winning the presidency are significantly reduced. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, I don't even think North Carolina was considered in play this election season, was it? It wasn't last season, was it?
So because of Mark Robinson, even prior to the scandal, actually was considered to be in play. So again, it's one of those things. It's kind of like Wisconsin, where your community and Progressive Victory have gone out canvassing before. It is a de facto purple state in the sense that for every registered Republican, you do have a registered Democrat. But because Republicans have done such a good job of entrenching their power when they do have it. We haven't had a Democrat win North Carolina since 2008. And I should also say that that's in some small part because of the Democrats making decisions basically to gut their own infrastructure and move on to different states. But it was in play because Mark Robinson was so damn unpopular. And now it really is a coin flip. As of recent polling, Donald Trump was only winning in North Carolina in aggregate polling by 0.1 percentage points. That's how close it is.
Well, I guess we'll see how this scandal impacts his chances going forward. Do you think Mark Robinson is actually going to try to stay in the race?
Yeah, he said he won't. He, in theory, he could withdraw even after this deadline. His name will still be on the ballot. In theory, he could just say, I'm suspending my campaign. I'm done. So I suppose I wouldn't put that off the table. But yeah, he's going to be on the ballot. And I would say, if I had to guess, I would say 90% likely he loses the governor's race to Attorney General Stein, which is good because then a Democrat will be in charge of North Carolina's executive branch. But I guess I really think this could cost Trump the election.
Well, I guess we'll see what happens. What do you got next?
So
procedural story.
We have two states in the United States which do not employ a winner-take-all system for their electoral college votes. One is Maine, blue state.
The other is
your home state.
Truly.
That's right, Nebraska.
For now it is, but I guess that's what we're getting towards.
Precisely. So the situation is this. Republicans had been publicly flirting for months about changing their electoral system so that Omaha, which is basically that lone blue dot in Nebraska, if a Republican or whoever won the popular vote in Nebraska and won the majority of electoral votes, all of the votes would go to that person. And they threatened to do it months ago. They signaled that they would do it. Trump obviously wants them to do it. Republicans at the federal level want them to do it. In state, Nebraska, most of them, the Republican and the Republican governors, they want to change it. But this is the big but. Maine, on the other side of the country, said if you do that, we're going to switch our votes. We're going to cancel yours out by screwing over the Republicans in Maine to balance it out. And so for that and various other reasons, it basically cooled the threat.
Can you tell me, for Maine, how are their votes normally divided up? Like, is it normally just one Republican electoral vote that the Republicans get, or is it two?
It's effectively the same thing. So they get it's one electoral vote for Maine for Republicans reliably, and so again, it's basically it cancels out Nebraska. Here's where the twist is. So Lindsey Graham, goes out to Nebraska, and he meets with the Republican governor of Nebraska.
5 Republican lawmakers from Nebraska are also pushing for this, but remind us which states sort of do this hybrid and why and what it would take for that to change.
Well, Nebraska, too. The Nebraska 2nd District has one electoral vote. And that area, that blue dot, if you will, is a very more traditionally Democratic voting section of a very red state. But that one electoral vote is part of one of the paths to 270 on the electoral map for the Harris campaign. And if it is a close race, and we do see in the polling data that we've seen this week in these key battleground states, it could, I want to emphasize could, come down to one electoral vote. Therefore, by changing that, by eradicating, if you will, that one blue dot, that one electoral vote, it gives the Republicans and Trump an advantage on that map. So that's why there's been such an interest by Trump allies. That's why we've seen Senator Graham, who is an advisor to the former president, go down there. And I think that that's something that we need to watch, because if that changes, it does it's a little bit like Jenga in terms of the strategic map for Democrats.
And the Republican governor of Nebraska says, hey, listen, I will convene a special legislative session. I will call the Nebraska legislature back into session if a sufficient number, I think it was 33, if 33 Republicans will publicly support the measure to change how we vote here in Nebraska. Yeah. And so Lindsey Graham went out there to lobby. And as of this moment, they still are missing like 2 or 3 crucial endorsements, but the number is shrinking. And here's where the twist really is. In Maine, they've passed the deadline, Stephen, to change Maine's legislature. So in Maine, the difference is that you have to make changes to laws 90 days before an election. That's the deadline. Anything after that, you can't make any changes to how election laws are changed. So basically, the theory is that Republicans have ran out the clock, knowing that we're past the point for Maine to cancel out what they do. And so in order for Maine to change how they vote, if Nebraska does this, they would have to get a supermajority, which would involve Maine's Republicans voting in favor of it too. And Maine's Republicans say, if Nebraska changes how they vote, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to help the Democrats change how Maine votes in order to cancel it out. And the risk is, if Nebraska does this, if they do what Trump and Lindsey Graham are scheming to do, there's a plausible election outcome where the vice president wins Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, but loses the Sun Belt states. And as a consequence, Republicans win Nebraska. Then it would make it 269 to 269. It goes to the House of Representatives. And guess who becomes president of the United States?
My guess is going to be Republican.
Exactly. So
because to explain for people, the when the vote goes to the House, it's considered the House delegation that votes, which just means the majority. I believe it would be the majority representatives from each state would determine where the state goes. So even if there are more Democratic House members, there are more states with the majority amount of Republican House members. If that makes sense to the audience, yeah. So
correct.
The Republicans, even if they're down in members of the House, can still be up in the absolute or number of states that have a majority of House Republicans. Yeah. Oof.
Precisely. It's called a state delegation. So, yeah, I want to be very clear about it. It's important for Democrats to take back the House majority, especially when it comes to the certification of the ballot. You don't want a Speaker Mike Johnson presiding over the 2024 election certifications, given that Mike Johnson, as you know from your deep dives into Donald Trump's fake elector plot and the January 6th stuff, Mike Johnson was a major ally to Trump's efforts to steal the presidency from President Biden. We do not want a Speaker Mike Johnson. But to your point, to be very clear, even if Democrats take back the House in November, and they're going to be gavelled in prior to the certification of the votes, that'd be good. But if it becomes a matter of state delegations, if this scheme works where they change Nebraska's law and the vice president doesn't win any of the Sun Belt states or North Carolina, and it becomes 269, yes, the Republicans will absolutely have the numbers advantage to make Donald Trump the president of the United States.
Well,
so I guess my question for you is, what do you think about that? I mean, because I to me, it's kind of referencing a recent conversation you had with the potential Russian asset, Kim Iverson. I kid. It is a procedural loophole. But to me, it's as bad faith as anything we've seen from the Republicans, too. To me, it's just like a continuation of the lawfare to try to bend the rules to get Donald Trump to be elected president. What do you think?
Yeah, I was going to say it's not even surprising at all. I mean, it's absolutely par for the course for Republicans. It would be pretty sad. I mean, I haven't lived in Nebraska for, I guess, like 5 or 6 years now. But I always remember growing up, we would always ask in school, because we would learn how our electoral votes are divided up. We'd always ask, like, why doesn't everybody else do what we do? And they were like, well, Nebraska's just really cool. Us in Maine, we divide our votes up or whatever. I never learned about Maine growing up. I think I just heard about Nebraska. But yeah, I think that would be pretty sad if Nebraska were to change it for literally to give one electoral vote to Trump, because I don't think realistically Democrat is ever pulling 2 electoral votes out of Nebraska, right? So it would just be for that one electoral vote. And it's like pretty blatant too. Why would you switch? It's so stupid.
Yeah, it just seems pretty transparently bad faith. I mean, again, the fact that they've had years to do this if they wanted to, but it really seems like they're running out the clock to basically just preemptively disarm Maine from canceling them out. So, again, as of the moment, the initiative still lacks like 2 or 3 critical votes to support it, but it's entirely possible that could change. And I think that any gamble which relies on elected Republicans acting in good faith, that's a losing proposition in 2024, in my opinion.
Not while Trump is here. Yeah, the MAGA stuff has to go, because these people will do anything to hold on to power. It's insane.
100%. So the other big, major story is potential government shutdown, Stephen. That's where we are. So this has been a continuous threat since the Republicans took the majority in the House of Representatives back in January 2023. They negotiated a deal with President Biden in May of 2023 by holding the debt ceiling hostage, even though they helped run up America's credit card bills. They basically told the president, hey, listen, we're not going to help you raise the debt ceiling. We'll risk a national default and a global economic catastrophe unless you agree to budget concessions. So President Biden and then Speaker McCarthy worked out a deal. They made a deal. They shook hands. Biden held up his end. The Republicans, predictably, did not. It ultimately cost Kevin McCarthy his job, and we've been funding the government instead of a full budget through what's called a continuing resolution, which is basically a stopgap measure, which expires every 2 to 3 months. We're at the end of it again. The current continuing resolution under Mike Johnson expires on September 30th, so in 9 days. And on October 1st, if there's not a continuing resolution or a full budget, the government will shut down. And Donald Trump is publicly pushing for a government shutdown because he wants a new law to be passed, which makes it illegal for non-citizens to vote, even though it already is, and to make it harder for eligible Americans to vote. So it would increase the documentation threshold needed to prove citizenship and eligibility. And a sufficient number of, obviously no Democrats going to back it, and there are currently like internal schisms within the Republican Party about the budget that Republicans say they want. So they've basically been tripping over their own dick on this. They're not able to pass this stuff. And yeah, the consequence is that there may be a public government shutdown. And last thing I'll say is Mitch McConnell is not very happy about it. He was asked about it and said it would be beyond politically stupid for the Republicans to trigger a shutdown.
One thing you cannot have is a government shutdown. It would be politically beyond stupid for us to do that right before the election, because certainly we'd get the blame.
And that's exactly what Trump's calling for. So more GOP infighting.
I think the shutdown, is one of the few times when the American public actually held the Republicans accountable for doing dumb things while in government. And with Trump calling for it publicly, and with the Republicans owning the House, I have a hard time seeing how they wouldn't take another political hit if a shutdown were to happen again.
Yeah, so it is. It's one of the few times that the American electorate, I would argue, is rational. You and I aren't running for elected office, so we can call out our fellow Americans for being highly irrational and selective in terms of how they interpret information. But this is one of the few times that historically, when Republicans trigger shutdowns, and they're much more likely to than Democrats, they usually pay a price at the polls, in polling, and also at the ballot box too. And that's the other thing. McConnell's like, we're weeks away from an election, and to trigger a government shutdown will almost certainly cost Republicans, potentially all three. So, I mean, politically, it might be in Democrats' best interest for Republicans to give into their worst impulses. It'd be bad for the country, so I'm not encouraging it. But yeah, that's where they are, with Trump saying one thing, McConnell saying another, Mike Johnson being caught in the middle. But to your point, I don't know how you possibly thread that needle. Politically defying Trump, and certainly doing it in public, it seems like a recipe for losing your job if you're a Republican.
So are you willing to go to the mat and allow the government to shut down right before the election?
Actually, I will tell you, yes, I am, and here's why. Okay. We need to cut spending in this country today. We need to make sure illegals aren't voting in our country today. And last but not least, why are we negotiating with the Biden administration over federal spending when Joe Biden is not running the country? It's being run by his staffers and his aides. They were not elected. So in my view, this is one of the reasons I supported moving funding after Christmas, moving it until the next president of the United States. So the House of Representatives and the Senate, they negotiate with the next president, because the current president is simply not in charge, and everybody knows it.
This is all really important points that you're making. Great points. Good for you, Congressman. I've heard it before. Shut down the border or shut down the government.
Why are Republicans so reluctant to ever shut down the government? Why don't they just shut it down?
Yeah, there's a whole spiel I'd go on about, like, well, maybe if Trump, doesn't win, maybe people start to jump ship and they're looking at their political futures, in a world without Trump. But I said the exact same thing in 2020, because I said there's no way that Trump would run again after losing. Why would you run against the same guy that you just lost to after 4 years? And then 2 years later, I think they did pretty poorly in their midterms compared to what they were predicted to do in 2022. And here we are in 2024, and Trump is running again. So I would imagine, you know, if it looks like Trump's going to lose, maybe Republicans will start to, you know, change their tune a little, but who knows? Maybe in 2028, maybe Trump's going to be wheeled out there, you know, talking about the cats and the dogs and what he's seen on TV again, and it will be doing the same thing for until the end of Trump, I guess.
Yeah, I firmly believe that there's no real capacity for introspection in the Republican Party because, to your point, he won in 2016, but he lost the midterms in 2018. He lost the presidency in 2020. They lost the Senate runoffs in eminently winnable states. I mean, Georgia, right? And then they lost the 2022 midterms and then the 2023 off-year elections. And there's just no limiting principle. If anything, the base that's loyal to Trump is even more loyal now than ever. I think as long as he's alive and as long as he wants to maintain some sort of active role in politics, he has them. He has them by the short and curlies, and that's it. Like, he either retires from politics and says, I'm going back to reality TV or just to golf, then they can be free, or that's it. I think even in defeat, he is still their God King.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. It's impossible to say that because I feel like in politics, losing is one of the worst things you can do because your constituents feel bad. You actually lose real political power. You damage your chances in future elections. But it seems like Trump is somewhat invulnerable to that political reality. So, yeah, I guess we'll see what happens.
No, 100%. Then last thing I'll say is the Supreme Court. I know you are aware of this, but it's a pet issue for both of us. There was a New York Times op-ed which interviewed dozens of court officials and people affiliated with the court. Obviously, they were granted anonymity in order to speak, but basically going into the departure of Chief Justice John Roberts from being like this moderating, mediating voice, always trying to gather either unanimity or a supermajority, basically trying to court liberals in order to grant their rulings more legitimacy. And it seems that in the most recent Trump-related cases, Chief Justice Roberts has been engaging with more open partisanship than his reputation would suggest on both the Trump immunity case as well as some of the other Trump-related cases. And I know you are aware of the story, so I'm curious what your thoughts are, because I have not heard you get a chance to really react to it at length.
Yeah, I mean, I read it. It's not surprising at all to me. Just from the opinions of Roberts that I've read, they seem atrocious. His writing on the immunity case was absolutely insane to me. The stories that have come out of this court just all seem insane to me. It wasn't that long ago. It feels like forever ago, but do you remember, was it the Dobbs case that leaked ahead of time?
Yeah.
There's just been so much insanity coming out of this court, and between Thomas's crazy writings, so the canon can dismiss cases in Florida for Trump, and the Alito flag thing, and everything else going on with his wife. I don't remember if you were on stream when we listened to the recordings of his wife talking at that dinner. Oh my God!
Can I ask you something on that? That was related to the article. So you'll note that one of the cases, now I'm blanking on it, you might have to correct me, but one of the cases, according to that article, was supposed to be written by Justice Alito. And then 2 or 3 days after that flag story broke, Chief Justice Roberts took that case away from Alito so that Roberts could write the opinion. Here's my question. If it could be proven or reasonably inferred that the reason he did that was because he was aware that story would be politically damaging to the court, would that not reinforce what you and I have been calling for, that Alito should have recused himself? Like, basically, if Roberts recognized that is politically damaging to the appearance of the court, by definition, wouldn't that mean that Alito should have recused himself, or Roberts should have pushed for Alito?
It wouldn't strengthen it. Definitionally, it would just be true, right? If there is an appearance of impropriety, then you ought to recuse yourself because it threatens the legitimacy of the court. And if the Chief Justice feels like there is an appearance of a lack of impartiality, then, I mean, it seems to be the case then that he probably should have just recused himself, right? If that was the reason why he truly took on writing the majority opinion for that case.
It seems to me, I mean, obviously they can't prove it definitively, but the timeline is such, but I can't speak for you. All I can say is that I don't give the court the benefit of the doubt anymore. So when timelines start to add up in ways that kind of lead to a cynical interpretation, that's just kind of what I default to anyway. But the last thing I'll say on the court is Donald Trump recently said that if he becomes president again, he would look to appoint 2, and he was very specific, a couple of MAGA justices, seeming to me to suggest that he knows that Thomas and Alito will retire if he becomes president again.
Whew, that would be truly horrifying. Just when you said 2 and you said justices, I immediately Giuliani and Powell are popping into my head. But you have to be a. Do you have to be a judge first to become a? I don't know if they're like qualifications or.
No, you don't.
I can't really appeal to norms at all with.
Why not Judge Cannon? Why not Judge Cannon out of Florida? Your state. Why not Judge Cannon? And she would be young. I mean, my God, she would be, she's what, in her early 40s? There's no age requirement. Unlike the presidency, you don't have to be 35 years old to be a Supreme Court justice. What is to stop him from not only creating not just a right-wing majority, but a MAGA majority? And the 2 people that he could put in Thomas and Alito's place could be young ideologues like Judge Cannon as a reward for her hard work.
Truly horrifying.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So that's it in the world of politics. That's basically all the news is, again, nowhere near as salacious and as sexy in terms of assassination attempts and all these things. It's not like high profile drama, but it is enough going on procedurally that I think that there could be major influence on the outcome of the election.
Yeah, it feels like we're on a road. Man, God, I don't want to eat my words here, but it feels like we're on a good road for Kamala. The only fear I have right now is the Walls guy. He seems too good to be true. It feels like he's got to have like kids, buried underneath his floorboards or something, or he's some kind of like the Trinity killer from Dexter or something, because my God, everything I see from this Walls guy, he just seems like the most wholesome, friendly, polite, kind, ordinary dude. I think I watched they did an ad recently where he's changing the air filter or whatever in his car, talking about it, and about how important it is. And then he relates it to some political stuff. And I'm like, man, what a nice guy compared to Vance, who has done blunder after blunder after blunder. The last time we spoke, was this before or was it after Vance had made the huge gaffe about if I have to make up stories to get the electorate to care about what's going on in Ohio?
It was the same day when we spoke last, but it was after we recorded that episode.
God, what a horrible soundbite.
No, 100%. And you know what's interesting is to see like right-wing commentators, pundits, and influencers try to parse that out in a way which is, again, pretty generous to Vance. Well, he's not saying that he lied. He's just saying that, he took these unsubstantiated rumors and used them to draw national attention to an ongoing issue that he can't exactly identify. Like, he didn't say he lied. He said he used things to create a story. And it's just like, I don't. Number one, of course, my litmus test is what if a Democrat said that? How would people react?
We don't have to imagine if a Democrat said that. This already happened with Hillary Clinton when she was in a meeting it was either donors or a private party meeting. She talked about how you have a private position, you've got a public position. There are things you advocate for. Personally, you might have things that you want to push harder on, but publicly you can only do so much. And yeah, she was excoriated for that comment. Like, oh, so secretly you want to turn us all into a communist dictatorship or take away all of our rights, and you don't have the gall to say it. Or there was that article. It was a really interesting article by, was it The Atlantic or the New York Times? It was called it was like the shadow campaign that saved the election or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that whole article was just about like all of the work that went in to verify the integrity of the ballot, to make sure that that all the machines were printing paper, that like everything was happening the way that it was supposed to ensure the integrity of the election. And man, I've had so many people throw that article at me. It's like, well, what about this? It's like, have you even read it? No, it was just the headline. So yeah, people will take anything. Conservatives, MAGA conservatives especially, will take anything a Democrat says and they will twist it in the craziest way possible. But JD Vance comes out and says, if I've got to make up a story, to get people to pay attention to my state. Well, when he says make up, he meant like the focus of the story on talking about these, and it's like, get out of here, my God.
Well, yeah, especially because
to be clear, also, no videos or evidence has ever emerged showing that anybody was eating animals. Well, aside from the ones that were allowed to eat, nobody was eating cats and dogs, especially Haitians were eating cats and dogs in any place in Ohio. I don't believe anything has come out substantiating any of those rumors.
No, not only are they unsubstantiated, they are directly contradicted by the mayor of Springfield, the sheriff or the chief law enforcement officer of Springfield, and also Governor DeWine, a Republican. I mean, like, it's directly, there's no evidence to support it, and it's directly contradicted by people who are otherwise politically aligned with Donald Trump and Republicans. And it's so wildly irresponsible, to say nothing of the fact that the Haitian community there, they're not undocumented. They're not illegal. They're here legally. Like, the whole thing is, it's insane. And it goes back to something we talked about in that first episode, which is we have to find a way to enforce standards, whatever the standard is. So like, I agree that there should be stricter standards for both parties just overall. But even if your standard is let politicians say whatever the hell they want. I think that's insane, but at least apply it across the board. What happens is again and again and again, these MAGA Republican politicians are just graded very nakedly on a curve. And that's just not sustainable because there's no incentive for MAGA to normalize. Why on earth would they? They don't get punished for it. I mean, you could say that they suffer electoral defeats, but to your point, this is still a close election. Even with all the shit going on, this election is still, for the most part, within the margin of error. Republicans have become convinced.
I would be ashamed if Kamala Harris won barely. Like,
yeah,
if anything was going to be like another Reagan tier sweep for Democrats or Obama tier sweep for Democrats, it's wild to me. This is wild to me. I will say, on a selfish personal note, I am happy that if I ever decide to run for president, I will never take seriously anybody that says, you've done too many crazy things in your past as a streamer and blah, blah, blah. I'll just run as a Republican because apparently none of it matters over there. So, yeah.
No, for real. I mean, like, my God, if not for your policy positions, they'd love you, Stephen, for the controversy and the scandals. Unfortunately, the policies are much too rational, I think, for the modern Republican Party, which really doesn't traffic in any of the other problem is, of course, if somebody asked you, hey, Stephen, what would you do to lower the cost of childcare? You could actually give an answer, unlike Donald Trump. So I don't know, man. This is crazy. There's no telling what's going to happen like next week. But yeah, right now the Republicans are really working overtime to procedurally change the outcome of elections. We didn't even get a chance to talk about what's going on in Georgia. That there's an ongoing story there with them changing how votes are tallied in ways that Brad Raffensperger, the Republican Secretary of State, and other Republican officials are like, this is insane. All it's going to do is create chaos during Election Day. But Trump supporters on the board of elections in Georgia passed a new rule, basically demanding that votes be counted manually in every precinct on Election Day. Which, of course, as you know, is much more likely to be prone to errors and contradictions than machine voting. And many people fear, including Raffensperger and other statewide Republicans, that this will create an atmosphere for Donald Trump and MAGA to challenge the results of the election or to challenge certification, to delay certification by basically creating a problem in advance.
Yeah, I guess we'll see what happens. The scary thing, too, here is that Trump's not just looking at losing an election. He's looking at potentially federal convictions if he loses this election, because you know that day one in office, he's going to be on January 6th. If he gets certified as president, he's going to be spamming whoever his next attorney general is. I need you to get rid of these cases yesterday. They have to go immediately. So, yeah. But, well, hey, thanks for giving us our weekly abridgment of what's been going on. What do we have to look forward to this week? Nothing big coming up, right?
No, like I said, another potential government shutdown. And then I think it's the week after we have the vice presidential debate between Governor Tim Walz and J.D. Vance. So that will definitely be eye-worthy.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. I'll see you next week.
I appreciate it, buddy.